Greetings, mortals. Welcome back to Ruinarch. I am Rail Shuffle Gunnathorpia Sharp, but you of course know me today as a documentarian. And today, we are returning to our series that investigates the daily lives of the mortal races of this world. As the world in question loads up, we are going to be taking a look today at the vampire, which, as we all know, is the ultimate form that every goth aspires to. I'm pretty sure it's... I tend to forget the difference between goth and emo, to be honest. It's definitely one or the other. I think it's... whatever. The time for the joke is past. Anyway, so we're going to do our customary look around the map. So here, starting from the top left, we have Cave of Trolls. We have a bear den. Some trolls have taken roost in this mage tower, next to another cave that has some kobolds. Along the bottom we have another troll cave. Oh, good, so I didn't mess that up. Excellent. And then we have some kobolds in this cave. Going down we have a wolf lair. Let us see, and then we appear to have one of the first of the, I believe this would be a human village. And then this appears to be an elven village, and between them is a cave that has some sort of quarry, it appears to be. Then we advance downwards, we see a little lake, we have some worms in this cave here, and then a mink den outside of it. We have some chickens, we have some bears and rabbits, another cave that doesn't appear to be occupied. And then over here we have another small human village, it appears. Then over here we have another village, but this one appears to be perhaps a little larger. And I believe that may in fact be indicative of it being the vampires, but we'll have to wait to confirm this. Meanwhile, we have a cave with a quarry immediately below that village. We have boars, we got bears, we got a lake, we have a graveyard, we have some wind nymphs in this tower, giant spiders in this tower, and in this lair, and then we have the final elven village south of the worm cave. As far as avoiding attention, I believe that our best bet is to set up right here by this lake. As we configure our loadout, obviously we'll be picking the Puppet Master once more to avail ourselves of the surveillance capabilities of this archetype, which we'll start with as per usual by placing the Watcher, and then we'll place a Imp Hunt. Let's see, we'll let time flow again just so I can place this down. There we go. Now obviously, as you can tell from our survey, we have the singular, I believe, vampire faction. So we will reveal their information, and then we will go to the Watcher, so that we can set up for a more in-depth look at their civilization. We'll place one right here, here, and here, for now. We will likely want to purchase an additional eye to take a look over it. We have eyes on this tavern as well, but for now this will suit our needs. So for those of you who are somehow unaware of what a vampire is, vampires are, at least within the scope of Ruinarch, a sort of affliction that can affect those of the mortal races, that causes their physiology to change such that they now require the blood of normal mortal races in order to survive. Notably, the blood of other vampires does not sate this need, and thus they have to prey on those outside of their community so that they may be able to survive. Now, I do not know to what degree of vampirism these individuals have. We'll have to find that out on our own. But Some notable capabilities that they have are exceptional capabilities in stealth that allow them to sneak up to and knock out individuals so that they can partake of their bloodstreams, as well as the ability to transform themselves into a bat-like creature, which not only allows them to move much more quickly than they normally can, but also allows them to move through normally impassable surfaces such as cave walls. Now we're going to take a look at Taylor here, who is apparently a vampiric miner. Now if we were to reveal her info... Wait a minute. Wait, is she not a vampire? Hold on. I was sworn this is the vampire clan. Is this not a vampire? Race says human. Confused. There's no indication of them. Alright, hold on. Something's amiss here. I don't have enough energy to look at anyone else. While this Taylor appears to, despite being in the vampire faction, not appear to be a vampire. That's very curious. I would have imagined that they would have all been vampires, but let us do some further investigation. I need to, going to need to do some things to try and get myself a little bit more chaotic energy. At risk of affecting the integrity of the experiment. Or I suppose the observation is a more apt description. But we now have a lot more chaotic energy, so now we can start looking at others and try to reveal their info. Aha! Alright, so Carlisle here. Carlisle is in fact a vampire, as noted in the traits section. This particular vampire, Carlisle, does not like being a vampire. He in fact loathes it. And that is a notable little additional trait on top of the vampire trait is whether or not they like their current condition. Of course, being that vampire is considered a trait, their default race is still considered a human. Regardless, Carlisle is drinking alcohol, so it is worth noting that vampires do partake of drink, which I'm sure is of great is great news to Eden. Now, we will keep an eye on Carlisle as I go through his stat line. No piercing, 43 strength, and 3 int. He's a logger, so I suppose this makes sense. Currently has 20 coins, has decent basic resistances to earth, wind, fire, and physical. Carlisle, as we can see, is now currently knocked out Taylor and then drank some of her blood and then got into bed because, interestingly enough, Taylor is also his wife. So it appears that Carlisle is a vampire with a human wife, so it is worth noting that the vampires do not apparently bear any negative connotations towards fraternization with those that they feast upon. It is also worth noting that Carlisle has gone to sleep at 1 a.m. or so, and thus it appears that vampires here do not innately consider themselves nocturnal. Now going back to his stats, his current status, he's entertained, he's sprightly, refreshed, stocked up, drunk, and resting. So overall, this particular vampire seems to be having a good time. He is also suspicious. He thinks danger is lurking at every corner. He's authoritative, has a very loud voice, which, as we all know, makes him excellent leader material. He is also an optimist, which means that he always looks at the bright side and his entertainment goes down more slowly than normal as a result. And then, of course, he is a vampire. Now, it is possible that he has taken a human, normal human, that is, as his wife, perhaps because he loathes a vampire and may be trying to hide this fact. Though the fact that they are a part of a very publicly vampiric clan seems to sort of deride that theory a bit. Regardless, there appears to be a wind nymph that has appeared in the mines. Not sure what's up with that, but, you know, hopefully Taylor, when she goes to work, will not find too much trouble with that. In the meantime, let's try and investigate using our chaotic energy to determine who else is and isn't a vampire in this community. It appears that Ash here, who is currently on his way to buy some food, is lycanthrophic, but is neither a lycan nor a vampire. The Wind Nymph also does not seem to be particularly hostile, though perhaps it will if it gets closer to one of the humans. Let's see, we have Kenley over here, who is hemophobic, so deathly afraid of vampires, oddly enough, and nocturnal, but not a vampire herself. So far, there seems to be the ratio between humans and vampires seems to skew heavily towards the humans. Meanwhile, Victor over here has apparently restrained and captured this wind nymph as a prisoner for the sake of the safety of the miners. He is also, interestingly, not a vampire, so I'm actually very curious now as to if we were to reveal every member of this village, how many of them would turn out to be vampires? Alright, so this one is a vampire, Nana. And then Spencer is also a vampire. So, okay, so maybe I'm just missing all of the vampires. So that's 3 vampires so far, and what is that, like 3 or 4 regular humans? But it does seem that there appears to be an even, more or less even, 50-50 split between humans and vampires in this clan. This seems to imply that the vampires have cultivated some sort of society where they do not need to venture out in order to find meals. The normal humans work normally, trying to produce their own food and obtaining materials just as the vampires would, but the vampires themselves are able to then rely on the humans that are working to produce their own food as their food source. We also apparently have a number of people who are nocturnal, given the number of Z's that we can see on the screen currently. But as we know, that does not inherently mean that these people are vampires. That is a very important distinction to make. For instance, we know that Dante is in fact a vampire. Alright. And then Greta over here, we don't have the ability to reveal her information. And then let's see, over in this bed we have Spencer. He is in fact a vampire, so it does appear that the vampires mostly seem to be asleep. But of course we know that Ash is not a vampire, so he was just resting, presumably having just come back from some sort of quest or combat and needed to recover. Now, one can only wonder if they actually at any point intend to do something about this nymph. Now, it is possible, as we've seen, not in this series, but in past streams, that it is possible for the villagers potentially tame anything that is not considered a creature, as indicated by the paw print next to their name, or in this case, title, classification, what have you, so that they may become a functioning member of the villager society. This allows them to do such things as keep pets and guard animals, as well as incorporate the services of beings such as the Ratmen, who are, in a sense, a sentient creature, but they operate very differently from the other sentient races of Ruinarch. Now we can see that Spencer is currently patrolling around the town which makes sense given that he is of the Marauder class. He has 5 piercing damage without a weapon. He also has 67 strength, which makes him very good in physical combat. His speed leaves a little to be desired, but perhaps that is due to him being in the starving condition. Hopefully he'll be able to obtain some food soon. He also has some decent resistances, 15% against earth, poison, electric, and mental, with an additional 10% to ice, fire, and physical, and 5% to wind. If we look at his talents, he does in fact have level 3 in martial arts, which makes him very well suited to his profession. He's now taking a break from his patrols to quickly feast on Devon's blood, and is now resuming his patrol. Now, if this were not a vampire clan, I would be able to potentially take the information of Spencer drinking Devon's blood and use it as material to inform others. However, I'm going to guess that if we go to the overview for this clan, we can see that they in fact revere vampires and are a very peaceful faction, surprisingly. And of course, if we look in their crimes, we'll see that vampirism is not listed, which of course makes sense, given that vampires are most likely given a higher overall ranking in the minds of the villagers. Though, of course, as befitting of a vampire-focused clan, they consider werewolves to be the only heinous crime. A crime, in fact, worse than murder or even cannibalism. It is very likely that if these people were to discover that someone was a werewolf, they would attempt to capture them, imprison them, and then eventually burn them at the stake. Which is slightly ironic, but for them, it is simply justice. Now Taylor's going to wake up Jemmy, who for some reason has passed out. She's feeling very lethargic. It's very possible that at some point some of her blood was removed from her body and is caused her to become a little sluggish. Now, what could have caused such a thing? Who could say? Who could say? I enjoy that Eden says we as if she's one of these people. She is, despite her preferences, is not in fact a vampire. But yes, I suppose that one way of looking at this is that vampires do not approve of the existence of furries and will terminate them on sight. Now, the reason for the moment why we are observing Jenny is that... Shut up. No, you're definitely not. You're definitely not a vampire, Eden. Trust me, you're not. Just because you're a bloodsucker does not mean you're a vampire. Now then, the reason we are focusing on Jenny right now is because her current condition as lethargic presents an interesting topic within vampiric society, and that is the fact that those who are not vampires within the society, as a side effect of being the vampire's food source, leaves them in a condition where they are often physically weakened in certain ways, which obviously impacts their productivity. In Jenny's case, for as long as she was lethargic, she was moving much more slowly, whereas right now, having the lethargy eventually wear off, is now able to move at normal speeds. This also implies that it is most efficient for the vampires to try and feed on humans while those humans are sleeping, as at least part of the time that they will spend lethargic will happen while they're not actually doing anything, and thus does not interrupt productivity in any way. Now, intriguingly, Jenny is actually a level 3 in martial arts and 2 in combat magic, so she's actually significantly better suited to being an adventurer of some sort, probably leaning towards the martial arts than the combat magic due to the difference in levels and to the fact that her strength is significantly higher than her intellect. Now, as we come over to Victor, we can see that he is eating at the table like a normal human would, which is indicative of the fact that he is not one of the vampires. And right now, Victor is heading to the town square, possibly to get a drink, possibly to hang around. And meanwhile, we have Daisy, who's going to mark a spot for a new dwelling, befitting the fact that she is the settlement ruler of Alarusan and the faction leader of Albanar. Now, if we were to reveal her info, we'll note that she is in fact a vampire, which does in fact make sense. It would be, in fact, I would consider it to be somewhat odd if the leader of a vampire clan was not themselves a vampire. So this is in fact very suitable. Now, you'll note that we have received a notice at the bottom that shows that rumor of prowling vampires is gripping the residents of Naranina. This would imply that the elves over here have been being assaulted by vampires. I do not know offhand, that is. Let's see. We're just going to look at the elves for a quick moment. Now, apparently, Draenarund is actually being accused of vampirism. And Angon is about to try and report this information. Similarly, Draenarund wants to report assault because Angon presumably attacked Draenarund, believing him to be a vampire. So as we can sort of deduce from this, the mere presence of vampires in the area appears to be riling up the normal occupants of the other settlements, and is causing them to turn on each other. And thus, without even having to actively make any attempts to do so, the vampires are spreading disorder amongst the other mortals, which will in turn make it much easier to feed upon them if desired. Unless, of course, those villagers have the vigilant trait, but of course that would apply regardless. Now, I'm going to hazard a guess here that some of the vampires of this community right here ended up going on some sort of quest over to the west side of the map, and one of them... we got something going on here. I'll pause and I'll finish my thought before we continue. So I believe that one of the vampires who was off on a quest required feeding and fed on one of the villagers, and this act caused the village to suspect that there is a vampire in their own village, and so now that is causing them to be suspicious of one another, regardless of the fact of whether there are in fact any vampires in their village or not. There's probably not, so very unfortunate for them. Meanwhile, we see that Carla was actually caught trying to knock out Taylor so that he could feast on her blood. But Taylor noticed, and now they are in combat against one another, each trying to, in their minds, defend themselves against the other. Now, intriguingly, it appears that the miner is in fact overpowering the vampire. Which seems to imply that in this world, vampires, as we can see, are not actually necessarily superior to the humans in physical combat. Though, of course, this may also have to do with the fact that he was a crafter, which means that perhaps his own strength was atrophied in comparison to his now ex-wife and widow, Taylor. And so, one of the vampires of this village has fallen to one of their own. Now, what we can perhaps deduce from this is perhaps that the humans are in fact not actually truly aware of the fact that they are members of a vampire clan and may perhaps believe themselves to be a part of a human kingdom. As there seems to be a, well, to put it simply, the humans do not seem to be necessarily aware of their current situation, and as we could obviously see from Taylor's reaction to Carlisle attempting to knock her out to drink her blood, are not accepting of the position of the vampires within this community. So perhaps it was entirely possible that Taylor was, up until that point, completely unaware to the fact that her husband was in fact a vampire. Which perhaps would make sense given that we know that Carlisle was loathing of the fact that he was a vampire, and perhaps was trying to hide it from his wife. Unfortunately, in the end, that has backfired against him, and resulted in his demise. Another thing that we'll note is that, despite him being a vampire, he did not attempt to escape in the form of a bat when he was severely weakened. So perhaps we can deduce that this ability, which has yet to be actually demonstrated, but is something that I have witnessed in my previous streams, is perhaps an ability that the vampires here are not currently capable of, and perhaps may not be capable of learning. Because, as we know, in the previous streams where I meddled with vampires, you have the ability to, if you are able to inflict vampirism on others, potentially upgrade the ability to cause them to gain new abilities over time, or immediately upon contracting vampirism. And this, of course, included the ability to turn into a bat. So it is possible that these vampires need to continue growing in strength until they learn the capability, or perhaps are not ever going to be able to obtain the ability without outside assistance, which, given that I am the Puppet Master archetype for this, is probably not going to happen. Now over here we see that Angon was having his crime judged. But I guess he was just sort of released. I guess that in the end, the leader of this town did not truly believe that Angon was in fact a vampire. Now we switch to Nana, who is one of the vampires and works as a crafter in Workshop 86. Currently, she is going to take some stone from the mine, presumably to drop it off at Workshop 86, for which we will commend her for getting smart. I will grant 50 points to anyone who understands the reference that I was just making. Now, if we take a look at Nana, she is vigilant, so stealthy actions performed on her will be noticed and reacted to accordingly. She is an optimist. She's fire resistant, which is causing her fire resistance to be a whopping 85%. And of course, she is a vampire, and she, like Carlisle, loathes her current condition. Which I am sure is a fact that Eden finds utterly bamboozling. Well, Eden, if you were not paying attention, then that is your own fault, and I'm not going to dwell on the fact anymore, because I must continue my observations for the sake of the documentary. As you can see, Nana has returned home, because despite being a vampire, she is not innately nocturnal, as we have gone over before. and for the moment seems to be acting more or less normally. Now, she does, for some reason, have potatoes in her house, but well, I was going to say that it's because there's someone else who lives here, but this other someone is also a vampire. So I'm actually very curious as to why these two vampires have potatoes in their house, given that they do not rely on them for sustenance. Perhaps, referring back to our previous... Excuse me, I need to get something to drink. Alright, let's try that again. So perhaps leaning back on our previous theory rather, about the humans not being aware of the existence of the vampires within their village. Perhaps the vampires are in fact gathering up the potatoes and keeping them in their house to keep up the illusion that they are in fact normal humans. Or as Eden is alluding to, perhaps they simply think that the potatoes are neat. Which is a perhaps odd theory to bring forth, but on the other hand is a much simpler explanation and therefore has the edge in terms of Occam's razor. And thereby we're going to at least give it some sort of consideration. Now Jenny here, intriguingly enough, notably is lethargic and not a vampire. Those two things are most likely related. Is going to report a crime committed by Selegnonor, who was the leader of the Elven village that we noted earlier, to Daisy. Now, as far as the crime that was committed, crime in question appears to be assault. Now, I'm not sure what prompted this. Perhaps she saw that when Selegnor was trying to apprehend Angun under suspicion of being a vampire, and unaware of the situation, assumed that Selegnor was simply attacking him for less justifiable reasons. Now over here, we can see that Dante is currently drinking. And again, noting that he is in fact a vampire. So, to the joy of Eden, presumably because she didn't hear me when I said this the first time, to the pleasure of Eden, it is proven that vampires can in fact consume alcohol. And on top of that, appear to enjoy doing so. Now, interestingly, Dante also loathes being a vampire. So it appears that Spencer, out of the vampires of this village, seems to be the only one that actually enjoys his condition. Who would have suspected that the guy who likes to carry two daggers on him at all times, in fact enjoys being a vampire? Well, the question isn't so much as to whether... I guess they would not be whether they are able to drink. It is more so whether they actually enjoy drinking. Given that the vampires have their physiology changed in such a way that the usual components for creating alcohol do not provide them sustenance, it is in fact entirely feasible that the alcoholic beverages would not have the same taste to them as it does to a normal. It may be possible that to them, alcohol does not carry the same taste, perhaps being completely tasteless, or otherwise having some sort of taste that is somehow to them even worse than normal alcohol. It is also entirely possible that, due to their physiology, they cannot actually become intoxicated or inebriated, and thus the general usage... I'm sorry, I need to go check something real quick. I just noticed something. Apparently, I don't know. How did Ash just walk through a freezing trap? Is it because of the 10% ice resistance? Or maybe it's because he's... No, that makes him immune to diseases. I don't know. Anyway. Like I was saying, it is entirely possible that the vampires would not be capable of becoming inebriated at all. And thus, they would not actually... Thus, when consuming alcohol, it doesn't actually give them a benefit and thus is completely pointless to them. Now, trying to remember who was drinking earlier. Was it Dante? Where is Dante? I don't know where Dante is. Dante? Dante, are you in bed? Oh, that's Greta. Karen, Vina, Barrick, Nana, Jenny, Taylor, Devin, Dante over here? Oh, I don't know where Dante is. Let's look in the registry. Ah, Dante is over here. So if we look at Dante, we can in fact see that he is drunk. And thus we know that not only do the vampires drink, but they can in fact become intoxicated, just like they would if they were not afflicted with vampirism. Which is, from a scientific perspective, a very interesting quirk of their condition, given that things like wheat, fruit, and other things that could be used traditionally to make alcohol do not provide them the same effects that they would without the vampirism condition. Which makes one wonder why fermentation is something that can afflict them, that can still affect them when other things cannot. Of course, I do not have nearly the scientific knowledge personally regarding things such as alcohol to make a determination on why this is. So instead, we will simply accept this and move on. As we can see, Dante is returning home, as it appears another group from the clan. Oh, nope, this is a group that is from another town, so we don't care about them. So Dante is returning home. He's no longer drunk, which is good for him, because that will allow him to get home faster, now that he's no longer inebriated and presumably drunkenly stumbling around. But he is starving, so hopefully once he gets home, he will find one of the humans of his village who he will be able to catch unawares and be able to feed off of for sustenance. For the moment, however, Dante seems content to just sit at home and take a quick rest after the long time he spent out, clean his guitar, and now he's going to go and try and knock out Jenny. Something that he has obviously succeeded in, and so he and Daisy are both going to feed off of Jenny's blood. Now, one thing that you will also note as we look at Jenny here is that her hit points are in fact still maxed. So from this we can conclude that the way the vampires feed upon humans is done in a way that does not actually impact their physical integrity, and thus does not actually physically weaken them beyond the lethargy. So the actual malice applied to humans who have been fed on by vampires is in fact very minimal. Though of course, there are situations where the lethargy would be in fact very unfortunate, but in this particular case, it is not going to be hampering her in a noticeable manner, especially given that she is currently asleep now. And it is likely that by the time she awakens, her lethargy will wear off very soon. Now we're going to take a look at Greta, because she's one of the few that's actually still awake. And she is, at this moment, this town's only example of a nocturnal vampire. She is also a music lover and blessed, which is a very interesting combination overall. She's sort of the, she's the one who stalks around the night and does good deeds for people in their sleep, I suppose. She's also, intriguingly, a farmer, which means that the vampires, either as a way of maintaining their cover amongst the humans, or as a way to simply indirectly help their own appetites, do in fact grow food for the humans. Now, as we can see, the leader of the town, Daisy, is heading towards Naranina, which I believe is one of the elven towns. Perhaps to take some sort of vacation. Uh-oh. Hold on. Oh, it appears that Spencer failed to get food in time and ended up dying from starvation. So unfortunately, that is another vampire of this town who has succumbed to his condition in one way or another. And now Greta is taking his body away to be buried in a completely separate location from where Carla was buried. Which I presume is simply due to the fact that they do not have a designated cemetery in this town. It also appears that Ash died at some point. He, however, was a normal human and was killed by a kobold, presumably out during a mission. One interesting thing that we can note from this is that if we look, we can see that he, in fact, has 279 coins on his body. So, presumably in this town, they do not have inheritance laws. Or Ash was just an awful person and decided that all of his wealth should be buried with him upon his death. Though it is difficult to say for sure which one of those is in fact the case. Now we can see that Dante got himself a basic axe, gives him more piercing damage and strength, very good for combat. We also note, we haven't noticed traits before, but he is an Earth Master, so if he were a mage, he'd probably be using Earth Magic, and he is diplomatic. So he's very good at mending relationships, and is considered a peace-loving do-gooder. So perhaps the reason that he is chosen to patrol across the town is because he cares about the welfare of both the vampire and human residents of his village, and now works tirelessly to make sure that they are all safe and sound. Now Nana is going to take stone from the workshop. Despite being very inebriated, she's drunk ×2. Perhaps intending to craft some sort of weapon. Given that she only has level 1 in crafting, she has limited options in terms of what she can make. And in her case, it appears that she is simply going to craft a basic dagger. And as we can see, the dagger is now complete. The approximate amount of time that it took her, I do not believe is particularly longer than it would take normally. Which means 1, vampires do not take particularly longer or shorter amounts of time to craft. And 2, the fact that she is drunk ×2 does not seem to be impacting her ability. Unless, of course, it is entirely possible that the drunkenness and the vampiric qualities are in fact canceling each other out, and perhaps vampires can in fact craft faster than humans normally can. But for the moment, we are probably better off with the more basic assumption that neither quality affects the speed at which she works. Although one or the other may have affected the quality, but that does not appear to be the case. I believe that 10 piercing and plus 3 strength is in fact normal for a basic dagger. And looking at the staff, 10 piercing and 20 intelligence also seems to be normal for that. Now Taylor, although a minor, appears to be have bought the basic dagger, which is not a bad idea. It is entirely possible that monsters could spawn in the mines at some point, in which case the need to defend yourself is very important. We'll also note that Jenny was just woken up by Taylor, which we can presume to be due to having a vampire knock her out for the intents of feeding upon her. A theory that is supported by the fact that she is currently lethargic. This also makes me wonder if Jenny is, for some reason or other, a preferred target within the village. Perhaps because Carla was killed by Taylor, vampires are attempting to avoid her. And perhaps there is some quality to Jenny that makes her more attractive as a food source compared to the other humans, because she does seem to get fed on quite a bit considering the number of vampires around. Which is to say that apart from that first time Taylor got fed on, I don't think I've seen anyone other than Jenny get used as a food source. Now, as revealed, notably Devin is one of the normal humans, a marauder with Earthmaster and authoritative. Decent resistances all around, 5 piercing despite no weapon, 69 strength, yada yada yada. Overall, a fairly competent marauder with level 2 in martial arts. Though she does have a level 3 in resources, which means that perhaps would be more useful to the village as a skinner, but overall, it is not that important. Now, if we look on our panel to the right, which contains the win condition, major events, and targets, you'll note that there are 2 villages, Indira and Noritani, which are going to be receiving immigrants soon. Now, this is the reason that I'm pointing this out is because this town, being owned by a vampiric clan, is not able to get migrations. As noted by the fact that I do not have the option to forcibly induce or stifle migration because it is not owned by Human Empire or Elven Kingdom faction. Now this is very important because what this means is that the population of the town will not increase naturally over time. Every time they lose someone, that is effectively a permanent loss. The only way that they can gain new members is if people end up, for one reason or another, leaving their pre-existing faction and then choosing to join the vampire clan. Which, if they are aware that it's a vampire clan to begin with and they are themselves not a vampire, would seem to be a somewhat odd choice. Unless, of course, they have someone within the town that they are already familiar with and enjoy spending time around, in which case I suppose there may be a decent reason for doing so. Now we can see that Greta over here is about to try and knock out Posey, try and drink her blood. Now, as you can see, things work perfectly, indicative of the fact that Posey does not have the vigilant trait. And was very unfortunate for her because all she wanted to do was visit the town And she got the common vampire welcome of a karate chop to the back and 2 fangs in the neck. And now we're going to see approximately how long it takes her to wake up. At this point, it has already been over an hour, which makes me worry about how long she's going to remain knocked out. Now, something very interesting here that we can note is that, just as a quick note, I want to return to the vampires, of course. She has absurd levels of resistances. She has 105% fire resistance, 30% poison resistance, 35% electric resistance, 34% mental resistance, 40% ice resistance, 21% physical resistance, 20% wind and earth resistance, and 10% water resistance, which overall is an extremely high amount of resistance. Near combat, but I can't tell where it's coming from. Oh, I see. It appears to be some humans who are trying to fight these bears. And are presumably doing decently well. Now we can also note that a hospice has just been constructed in the town. No, that wasn't a vampire. That was a normal human we were looking at. Also notably, that human did have fire resistance as a trait, which boosts it up considerably, so that at least made sense. But yeah, that particular vampire, or sorry, that particular person was not a vampire. Looking around, see if we can find a vampire though. But as you can see from Nana, you actually can have a vampire who is fire resistant. As is the case with Nana, who has exactly 95% fire resistance. So she is all but immune to the flame. What you would call a fireball would be a mere tickle of a match flame. And now Taylor is playing some tunes on her guitar to try and forget the pain of the fact that her deceased husband was drinking her blood on a very likely nightly basis. Now you can see that over here, Nana is apparently going to try and knock out Taylor to drink her blood. But was noticed in the act and is now also fighting Taylor. Daisy also attempted to knock her out, but apparently failed. And now these two are locked in heated combat, which, looking at their health bars and their approximate amounts of health, is likely going to result in Nana's death. And that will be a secondary vampire, if that is indeed the case, that Taylor will have brought to the grave. And so it is. And so it shall be. At this point, one wonders why Taylor is taking up the profession of mining, considering that she, by all accounts, seems to be more suited to being a competitive class. Though, notably, her resource is at level 3, so her current job actually does fit her. But one would wonder why she has not, at this point, already taken up the position of vampire hunter, given that she's probably killed more vampires than anyone that she knows. Also, amusingly, she is currently now wanted in her own town due to perceived assault crimes because it was not noticed that she was defending herself from a vampire, merely that she was attacking someone who was, by all accounts, weaker than her. But at the very least, Taylor's tribulations have saved Jenny from being made lethargic. Now, as we can see, a giant spider has come and has stolen Jenny away. So I'm going to make a guess that Jenny would have preferred that she be fed on by a vampire instead of being carried away by a giant spider. As it is now a matter of if anyone is going to notice that Jenny is being taken away, and if a rescue can be mounted before she is, well, to put it frankly, eaten. Over here, we can see that Daisy is now planning to make her turn at trying to knock at Taylor. So that she can feed. But of course, Taylor is vigilant, as well as fast. And that is the reason why that she has not been able to... why she has never yet to be knocked out. However, Daisy, being the leader of the town, is able to put additional political pressure on Taylor, and thus Taylor is not attempting to properly protect herself. For now, Daisy, being a druid, is gathering herbs for the auspice, so that in the event that one of the town members is wounded, she can, or rather, they will be able to acquire the medical attention that they need. Now, we return back very quickly to Kenley, who, as we noted before, is hemophobic. She is, in this vampire clan, deathly afraid of vampires. Which, again, is a somewhat worrying position for her to be in, given the number of vampires that are still around. Even if the population of the town is dwindling, they started at 12 and have gone down to 7. 5 of their members, 3 of which I believe were originally vampires, have all become deceased. Now, I can hear combat off in the distance, but we don't really care about that because I doubt that it's related to vampires in any way. Besides which, I don't even know where I would look for that. As suspected, the giant spiders are in fact feeding on Jenny. She still has most of her health, but considering that there are 4 giant spiders here, that may not be the case for long. So one can only hope that the members of at least some village are going to be able to work out the membership to liberate her from the spiders and remove them from the area. And while Dante went to the hospice for the sake of being able to acquire a healing potion, which will prove very useful in the event that he ends up in some sort of combat. He's also at this moment feeling hungry, so perhaps he will decide to try and acquire a meal before bed. But for the moment, he seems intent on going to the tavern, likely to drink away his sorrows due to having lost a loved one. Specifically Spencer, who was ostensibly a very good friend of his. So now he's just hanging around with his wife in the tavern, roaming around, possibly going to get a drink, so that he can drink away his sorrows. And there he goes. Now, Greta, it seems, is intent on getting her meal, and is trying to make her way towards Kenley to knock them out, while Kenley is just in the middle of doing their work to try and construct a new dwelling. A endeavor that is vaguely less useful than it would be for other people, mainly due to the fact that they're faction type does not receive migrations, and thus they are less likely to have new people join than other factions would. Meanwhile, Greta has come by so that she can finish what Kenley had attempted to start, but ended up being rudely interrupted by a vampire. Of course, Greta doesn't really care about that because she is herself a vampire and thus does not care. But at the least now, Kenley is, while still knocked out, is at least knocked out in a building instead of on the open ground. So perhaps for that, she'll feel thankful to Greta for. Now Kenley is heading to the workshop, presumably to go and craft something. No idea what. Maybe a basic shirt. Maybe a basic dagger. Maybe a basic staff. All of these things, as we all know, are very easy to make out of stone, which is the material that she is planning to use. Unfortunately, meanwhile, it appears that Daisy has died of starvation, likely due to the fact that she had earlier attempted to feed on Taylor, but was repeatedly interrupted by the fact that Taylor is vigilant. And this ended up preventing her from being able to get the meal that she needed, and she is now sadly passed away, leaving the village. Actually, the village still has 7 people, specifically due to the fact that one of the elves of another faction has apparently decided to try and join them. Now, of course, he himself is not a vampire, so perhaps he is not aware of the situation, but regardless, he is himself also vigilant, so he is also going to prove a problem for the vampires that live here. We'll also note that a new person has taken control of the vampire clan. And as a result of this, it appears that the new faction leader, Devin, has made it so that only those who are vampires are allowed to stay in the vampire clan, which has resulted in everyone else being forced to leave. Now, this creates an interesting dynamic due to the fact that now the vampire clan of Albanar is no longer able to go amongst their own for the food that they require. So now with only Dante, Greta, and Devin around, they are now going to need to go to other societies, other villages, other factions, to get the blood they need for their own survival. And if they are not able to do so, with a consistency of any sort, this town may end up being doomed, only to eventually be being taken up by a faction that is not vampiric in nature, both literally and figuratively. Now, Devin appears to be making a new lumberyard. And ironically, at this point, the fact that Greta is a farmer actually does not help the town in any way anymore, given that the only remaining residents do not feed on what she grows. Thus, if it were, thus it would be most effective for the community if she were to change her job as something more suitable. Despite the fact that she has level 4 in food, which is very high. Maybe she'll become a merchant. That might be somewhat useful. Also, I can't help but get this vague feeling that Dante is stuck in place, which is unfortunate if that is indeed the case, because he is currently starving, and if he does not move, he is going to more likely than not end up dying from starvation, leaving the town with just 2 vampires. Now, as we're going to take a look, we're going to see, so of course we have Umbania and Fararani, which were the original human and elven factions that I put in this map alongside the vampires. Meanwhile, we have 2 vagrants, and we had one undead necromancer, but apparently that necromancer was killed by a bear at some point. As you can see, yeah, now there's only 1 vagrant, presumably having joined one of the other factions or possibly died. As you can see, a lot of people ended up at some point becoming a vagrant and then dying, some way or another. Don't know why. Don't actually have. Oh no, these I understand. These are all the people in the graveyard that started off dead. I understand. Also appears that Dante has in fact moved, so he's still going to have to deal with the fact that he is starving very soon, or else he'll find that he is no longer starving in a way that, you know, not conducive towards health. So we're going to keep an eye on Dante here, and fast forward time a bit, and we're going to see if Dante actually does anything to deal with his hunger. He appears to be going back and forth and has now decided to get some sleep, which I would not say was the optimal choice to have made in his current condition. But we'll see. Perhaps he will, after a rest, be able to go out and find the food that he needs. Speaking of which, it appears that some elves... Yes, some elves have shown up. Wait. No, an elf and a human. Interesting. An elf and a human have come to visit the town. Which, if if Dante gets up in time, might be able to take advantage of to get the food that he requires. Seems to be unsure of what he wants to do. He seems to be getting out of his seat and then sitting back down. He is now at this point considered malnourished on top of starving, and is currently going out on a patrol. But honestly, the usefulness of the patrol at this point is very limited, considering that 2 of the people here are patrolling and the other is a farmer. But it appears that Dante has gotten the windfall that he required, as he is currently chasing after Edith in an attempt to knock her out so that he can save himself from being, well, deaded. Unfortunately, Edith apparently noticed what happened, due to herself being vigilant, and because of that, Dante was not able to get a meal. Which now very much leaves him in a very precarious position, especially now that even if he does survive by finding some sort of food, he is now wanted as a vampire by other factions. Meanwhile, it appears that Devin has decided to become a miner, so Dante remaining as a marauder is actually still good for the town. But Dante is still in the unenviable position of being close to possibly dying of starvation. Because it appears that there is an inordinate amount of people on this map who are vigilant and thus are able to avoid becoming a vampire's meal. No longer any vagrants. We're going to just mark all 3 remaining vampires. Up, and there it goes. Dante just died of starvation, leaving just 2 vampires left, Devin and Greta. Greta notably has just knocked out Darthandel and drank his blood in the middle of town, but somehow was able to avoid being noticed. Notably, this town has also apparently managed to capture a mimic. Very interesting. But at any rate, Greta has managed to, within those few moments, prove herself a more efficient and effective vampire than Dante did during the course of the past few days. As she was not only able to obtain sustenance in another town, but she was able to do so in broad daylight without being noticed, which is truly an impressive feat. She also apparently has level 5 in food, which is absurdly high. That's really not necessary, especially for a vampire. I'm actually somewhat curious if there are any more, if there are any vampires outside of Albanar, but I suspect that is in fact not the case. And now, with another vampire buried, there are but 2 left. World, Greta and Devin. Slowly just trying to eke life by. Despite the fact that they should, by all rights, be considered the apex predators, they appear to not have any notable physical traits that actually give them an advantage against those who are not afflicted with their condition. And while they are decently equipped, Greta at least isn't actually all that suited towards combat. Her strength is 37, which is not particularly high, and this is on top of having a benefit from her weapon. And despite having a basic shirt, her hit points are less than 1400. She is also apparently starving at this point, which for the vampire seems to be a recurring state of being, more so than for the normal humans. But Greta at least is able to do a decent job at finding people out and about whom she can feed upon and ensure that she is able to avoid Dante's fate. Poor Dante. Never gonna live long enough to see Virgil again. Very sad, very sad. Or combat noises, but I can never find where combat is coming from. Constantly hear it, can't do anything about it. Didn't mean to click that, meant to click Devin. Devin at the least has a job that is still of use of sorts to the village. Though without any dedicated crafters, the only real use for all the stone that she is collecting would be to construct new buildings, which at this point they don't have any particular need for. The only real building that they appear to be missing here is the, well, in theory they could build a cemetery, and they could also build a, what is it? What am I thinking? Prison, yeah. A prison would be the other thing. Though, considering that there's only 2 of them left, the prison would be of dubious usefulness. Unless, like, someone happened to come by and randomly attack one of them, I suppose. Cemetery, of course, would probably be a worthy addition considering the number of gravestones that are around, though I'm not sure if they were to build one now, if they would be willing to move all the gravestones into the new cemetery. As we can see, there are more people who have come to visit the town. I'm not sure in particular why this appears to be a hot spot for people to visit. But at the least, it sort of proves to be a boon for the vampires that are still here, as they are able to, if need be, feast upon the visitors to maintain their sustenance. Here, combat again. I'm getting annoyed. Stop it. Cap it. And it continues as it was. Devin continues mining. Greta works on the farm. Both of them hang out at home, sleep when they need to, eat when they need to, and overall live existences that, for the most part, don't differentiate very differently from the normal humans and elves. The only particular difference is that for them, tourism is a much more important part of their lives than it would be for any of the other factions, due to the fact that their lifeblood, in a very literal sense, is dependent upon visitors. Now, we're going to be cutting it a little sooner than usual, but at this point, I do not feel that there's anything else for us to learn from this disparate, near isolated town that we started upon, that at the beginning had a very healthy population, but over time has now dwindled down to 2 people. Greta is going to chase after Letha, but is not going to be able to catch up to him in time. Which is unfortunate, because she is in fact starving. Which, again, seems to be a constant state for a vampire, in this world at the least. But, in the meantime, I thank you all for coming and following me on this little journey of discovery. Watching the supposed apex watching these supposed apex predators constantly attempt to just maintain some sort of life here in this harsh environment that is filled with people who have the vigilant trait and thus are, well, to be frankly, who seem to be vigilant and also better at combat than them. So it almost feels like the vampires, as it were, are considered almost more of a pest than an actual threat to the normal mortals. But regardless, this is where we are going to be calling our little documentary. I, of course, am the documentarian, and I will see you all later. Listen, I know that one wasn't particularly unique, but you know what? Not all the outros can be winners, right? I'll see you later. That's all you're getting from me. Go home. Or, well, if you're watching this, you're probably already home, but you know what I meant.